Good evening. We'll be starting this NEU NUS Zoom for student teachers in a second, but I'm just going to explain some of the accessibility features that are available on our call. First of all, this is in a webinar setting, so people won't be able to see you, but this call is being live streamed on social media. So if you ask a question and your question is asked, it will be publicly available. We have Sam Riddle and Nikki Evans providing BSL interpretation for those who require it this evening. We also have subtitles. If you click closed caption at the bottom of your screen, you can turn on a button that says subtitles and also download a transcript of this call. The chat function is also off for this meeting. So if you do need to ask a question, please put something in the Q&A. I'll now hand over to the chair of this call, Robin Bevan, who's the National President of the National Education Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike, and thank you also to others who are working behind the scenes tonight, Sean Bassett, Scarlett Harris, and we've already given a warm welcome to our two British Sign Language interpreters, Sam Riddle and Nikki Evans. As has been indicated already, tonight there will be the opportunity for any of you on the call who wishes to post questions in the Q&A function. And we're going to be coming to those questions in the third part of this evening's feature call for you. So let me just take you through a few of the things that you can look forward to across the next hour. And in doing so, introduce myself as well. I'm Robin Bevan. I'm a serving head teacher, undertook my teacher training many years ago and have followed a really fabulous, sometimes challenging, but very definitely rewarding journey through the teaching profession. And this year, not only serving as a head teacher, but also as the national president of the National Education Union. We know that most of you on the call tonight are trainee teachers, and we know that most of you are already members of the National Education Union. And we would encourage you, please, to take the opportunity to join if you're not already. It's free as a trainee, and it only costs you £1 in your Nqts year. And it's a hugely valuable support mechanism for you, both in terms of professional advice and guidance, but also just in case those circumstances arise where things in your workplace aren't quite as they should be. Thank you for joining the call. We've got a number of special guests with us this evening. In a moment, I'm going to be bringing Courtney in. He will be in conversation in the middle part of tonight's call. Kevin is probably well known to many of you through the national media as one of the joint general secretaries of the National Education Union. Kevin, a physics teacher formerly, and has worked his way through trade union and school employment to find himself in the position he is in later. And he's going to be filling the conversation in the second part of tonight's call. The first part features a number of people who've got a long connection with the National Union of Students and also are associated with the NEU. So I'm just going to introduce a couple of names to you. First of all, we've got Nazifa Zaman. She serves in a school in Coventry. I'm just checking the details. Yes, she works in Coventry. Part of the school's pastoral team. She's head of year 8, fantastic role for any teacher to get involved in, and is also serving as acting head of year 10. She's a member of the National Education Union in Coventry and currently also sits with the NUS on their, and I think I've got this right, National Scrutiny Council. I hope I've got the title right. I have, I'm getting nods. That's fantastic. She's also, this is Nazifa, is also co-ethnic minorities officer at the Warwick Students' Union, which I guess is Warwick University Students' Union. So this is a fantastic opportunity to hear from Nazifa. And we've also got Hattie Ruddick with me. And she is a trainee business and drama teacher from Manchester, so a little further north. Currently also on the National Scrutiny Council of the NUS, having been one of the women's officers at Manchester Students' Union last year and organised in her time there Manchester's Justice for Education rally last summer. She's been working with young people as a youth worker and within schools since 2014. So the progression, natural progression into training as a teacher makes a huge amount of sense. And we are just waiting for Larissa Kennedy to join the call. Larissa is the current president of the NUS. Elected in 2020, Larissa has been a passionate defender of students' rights during the pandemic. And prior to becoming NUS president, was education officer and deputy president at Warwick Students' Union, where Nazifa, you were there at the same time. I'm guessing you must have overlapped. Fabulous. Between 2018 and 2020, Larissa served on the NUS National Executive. She's a member of the NUS Black Students Campaign, an advocate for women and girls' rights, and is involved in two charities, Youth for Change and Forward, both charities which campaign against violence against women and girls, including issues relating to FGM. So hugely important issues. Now, I just need a little shout out to the technical team as to whether or not Larissa is going to be able to join us. If I could just have a response, otherwise we'll move straight in to that section of tonight's call. Students in conversation, an opportunity for NUS students and student union officers to speak about their experiences of the last year. And we've got Hannah Sketchley just joining us. I'm just checking through. Hannah, are you standing in for Larissa, or is Hannah Sketchley the name? I'm getting a little confused here. I need some help. It is, it's Larissa. Fabulous. It's all right, I'm catching up with who's on my screen. Larissa, you're currently muted. I hope you heard the introduction. We're just waiting for Larissa to come in. Still obviously some technical difficulties, but that's been a feature for all of us of the last year. So no reason why tonight will necessarily be any different. We still haven't got Larissa live. I don't think we've got her included, but I'm not picking up any sound or video. So I'm going to pass straight over to Nazifa, if I may. And Nazifa, I'm just going to start with you and just to ask you a little bit about what it's been like in your roles, your joint roles, both as an NUS advocate and also as a head of year, and enjoying the early years of professional growth as a teacher. So Nazifa, if you just want to pick up from there, and I think Larissa will be able to come in after that. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction. My name's Nazifa, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am currently head of year 8 and acting head of year 10 at the school I'm working at. Just to preface this, I want to make it clear that I'm actually not a trainee teacher or a student teacher. I am just part of the pastoral team at my school. So currently I'm still in the middle of my undergraduate degree in history and politics, but have taken temporary withdrawal for the year. So just to go into my experience, I started off in September. You know, when schools were just reopening, people were confused as to why schools were reopening. Cases were definitely not low enough for schools to be reopening. And also just getting the hang of the day-to-day activities. You know, this is the first school I've ever worked at. And it was such a big responsibility. I was taken in as the head of year 8, like you said, but I was also then given the role of acting head of year 10, as the head of year 10 at my school has been shielding for most part of the year. It has been a difficult year, you know, learning on the job, and then a month in having to take on another year group, learning new names while I was also still getting the hang of the names of my own year group. And just being part of the pastoral team this year has really opened up my eyes to, you know, the difficulties young people have been facing since the beginning of the pandemic, or since the virus reached us here in the UK. So I my role is mostly to do with safeguarding, you know, to ensure that all the students are safe while at school, but also while not at school and while at home. And that includes liaising with any external agencies who are involved with a student's life, and also dealing with things like attendance, punctuality, and all of that. So, you know, we started off school in September, and it was hectic, but I, you know, slowly got used to the school, and we went through the first term, and then the November lockdown came and schools were still open, and again the head of year 10 was asked to shield, so then I had to take on the year 10s again when I previously had for a few weeks during the first half term of the year. And then we got through November lockdown, schools open, everything went back to normal at the beginning of December, and then we shut down for the Christmas holidays, and then we came back in January. Luckily, it was only staff in school for the first couple of days while the NEU was still campaigning for schools to close. And, you know, with the action that the NEU took, delivered a real victory to school staff. But my role as being part of the pastoral team meant that I was in school throughout most of this past lockdown, ensuring that students who had to be in school were in and were safe, were fed, were able to access their lessons, that sort of thing. It has been a whirlwind, but it has also taught me a lot, and I'm really excited to go back to my degree next year and then see where the education sector can take me, or where I can help to take it as part of this broader movement.
Thank you ever so much. Now, I'm just going to see if Larissa is now operational to take over. My apologies for the slight disruption at the beginning there. And Larissa, you missed the big introduction. I did my very best to speak very positively about all the things you do. Are you good to pick up the chairing for this section, Larissa?
I'm very much hoping so, Robin. I'm just checking that you can hear me and that everything's great.
We can.
I'm getting
absolutely we can.
So amazing. So apologies about that, folks, with regards to my Wi-Fi. It decided to play out exactly 2 minutes before the call started. But just wanted to say a huge thank you to Naz for sharing that story about your realities of coming into school, you know, fresh faced from being a student and really having to navigate that. And Hattie, I know you wanted to share some of your experiences before, and then we can get into a bit more of a dialogue. But yeah, Hattie, please do come off mute and give us a bit of a sense of your experiences over the past few months.
Yeah, thank you, Larissa, and thank you, Robin, for that introduction as well. So as I said earlier, I'm Hattie. I'm a trainee teacher. I'm specialising in business studies, but my second subject is performing arts. When I started my teacher training, I knew it was going to be challenging, but I had no idea it was going to be like this. I knew that I was starting in a pandemic, but I had no idea that the government would be changing things less than 24 hours before they were meant to happen. And I knew that as a teacher, after last year, my trust in the Department of Education was going to be low, but I had no idea that I'd still have second year A-level students that are about to go to university and go on to jobs in March asking me how we're going to determine their future. The thing I really need to emphasise here is that my placement school are incredible. I can't fault them here. And all my anger and all my confusion about everything that's happened this year does go purely towards the government right now. The placement school I'm with, my mentors, the staff at the school are some of the most supportive people that I've met and worked with. And as trainees, we do need to acknowledge that teachers are really struggling in these times as well. They've never experienced anything like this. So I do have complete and endless solidarity with them. The government have completely ignored teachers, yet they've completely forgotten trainee teachers and non-teaching school staff. This year, I've experienced teaching from home, online, in a completely inappropriate environment. As a trainee teacher from a working class background, with young siblings at my family home, being 23, I moved into student accommodation this year, and moving into a flat on my own wasn't an option for me financially, so I had to move to student accommodation. And let me tell you, student accommodation is not the place to deliver lessons to 16, 17 and 18-year-olds. I've had maintenance staff walking into my room and into my flat without prior notice or permission. I've had loud music coming from other rooms. I live in the centre of Manchester. I've had fights from outside of my flat being able to be heard in my room while I've been teaching. And some of these have been during formal observations. I've been teaching when the Wi-Fi in the accommodation has been shut off, or the fire alarm has gone off because someone's smoking. And this has stopped me teaching my students who are relying on me. Yet the Department of Education has completely ignored these factors. This year, trainee teachers still have to meet the same requirements that they had to meet in 2019 in a pandemic. In a year that trainee teachers are self-isolating left, right and centre, I've self-isolated twice during my training year this year. We've been teaching online in poor conditions for 2 months, and we've had our subject mentors and the staff that are meant to be supporting us have to isolate or shield. And we still have to meet 100 hours. We still have to get all our formal observations in, and we've had no adjustments made for us this year. Still, with all of that, teachers, school staff, trainee teachers have not been prioritised for the vaccine. Personally, I can teach up to 79 students in person in one day. Those 79 students, all from different households, all who will have been mixing with other students in their other classes. All school staff will have families, bubbles, or housemates of their own, who also may be highly at risk. This is not good enough. When teachers signed up to teach, we were not signing up to risk our health. The government is ignoring calls to vaccinate teachers, and it's appalling. It's not surprising that 52% of teachers this year said that their mental health has declined recently, and I wouldn't be surprised if that figure's dramatically increased since the 8th of March. Personally, I've always struggled with my mental health. However, my anxiety has never been this high as it has been this year. I always wanted to be a teacher, and having worked with young people in and out of schools for the entirety of my working life, I went into my Gcse understanding the pressures of teaching. However, the pressures that have been put onto trainees, to teachers and to school staff this year are unprecedented, and they do need to be addressed before we see the rates of teachers significantly drop and teachers becoming even more overworked, underpaid and potentially unwell.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Hattie. And I think there were so many common threads there between what you and Naz were saying about having to be so responsive to a directive from government that comes at the last minute, throws everything up in the air for you, and has made it almost impossible to navigate this in a way that's healthy for your work-life balances, for your mental health and so on. And so, given that so much of this sits at government's door, I guess the question I would pose to you, and we're really, really welcoming questions from the floor, so please do submit those through as we're going. But the first question I'll ask you folks is, if there was one thing that you could get the Department for Education to listen to tomorrow, what would it be and how would it impact you as student teachers and trainee teachers? Naz, did you want to jump in first?
Yeah, sure, I can jump in first. So this question was actually really interesting. I had a few things that I would like to ask the Department for Education for, but if we were whittling it down to one thing, then I would say scrap exams, just long term. Scrap exams altogether. Students, secondary school students in the UK are assessed constantly, and having a one-size-fits-all approach to measuring progress and learning is A, horrifically ableist, but also B, really, really draining on students and on staff. Even though exams have been scrapped this year because of the need for clear evidence of centre assessed grades and whatnot, and just as precautionary measures measures. Schools have been assessing students from the get-go since coming back from lockdown. I know that's been the case at my school. The assessment window has been going on for about three weeks now, and it will continue until we break for Easter. So yeah, it would relieve a lot of pressures off of students who are increasingly suffering from anxiety and other mental health related issues, and also staff from being overworked. I have friends and family who work in education across the country who are being given ridiculous deadlines to mark hundreds of papers, all whilst, you know, trying to keep up with the welfare of their students as well. And their own, you know, we can't forget that school staff aren't robots. We have our health to look after as well, and unfortunately that does sometimes get put on the back burner when we've got so much on our plate already. So yeah, the one thing I'd ask for is for scrapping exams in the long term.
I think a powerful way that students, teachers and school staff and student teachers, of course, are united in seeking that kind of review of that element of examinations and the pressures on our young people, on students and so on, as well as on teachers. Hattie, I don't know if you want to jump in there in terms of what you would ask of the Department for Education.
Yeah, so I was going to say scrap exams, but Naz put it perfectly. So I'm going to talk about something else. Bursaries. So next year, only STEM, languages and classics trainees will receive bursaries to train to teach. However, just because I'm training to teach business studies doesn't mean I have less life costs than somebody who is training to teach maths. And by doing this, the government constantly undervalues different subjects and even different sectors. So this year, if I trained in secondary, I would have received a bursary of £9,000. But because I've trained to teach in further education, I don't receive anything. By differentiating bursaries, the government are creating elitism between different sectors of education and between different subjects. In my personal opinion, all subjects and sectors of education are worthwhile, and doing teacher training is full on. When I started my PGCE, I was told to quit my part-time job. I mean, if I did this, I wouldn't be able to pay my rent or feed myself or pay my bills, and I'd be in a lot of trouble. So I had to carry on working. But this is pushing working class students out of the teaching profession and ensuring that working class students don't have anyone to look up to, any role models in their school that are similar to them. As a trainee up until December, so up until the third lockdown, I was working 16 hours a week in my part-time job while being on placement 5 days a week because I'm on a school-centred initial teacher training, so I'm there full-time. And as a student with existing mental health issues and with existing disabilities, this was absolutely detrimental to me. I was so sick by the time it came to Christmas and New Year. But this wouldn't have happened if I'd received a bursary. And I can guarantee I am not the only student teacher that has dealt with this. Other people on my course have also really been struggling while having to just live off student finance, which we all know it doesn't work. We all know it's defunct. And we all know we should just scrap the system and completely overhaul it. But no student teacher should ever be in the situation that a lot of us have been in this year. So if I had my chat with Gavin Williamson tomorrow, it'd be that.
Well, thank you so much, Hattie. I think that need for structural solutions to how inaccessible things are in this moment, it really resonates with folks. I can see coming through on the questions, people very much agreeing with you. And someone has asked if it's normal for trainees not to housemates still don't have placements in schools, but the university are comforting them by saying that they'll get qualified teacher status without placements as long as they meet the teacher standards. I don't know if you folks have reflections of how it's been for others around you who may or may not have had placements and so on.
I think Hattie will be best placed to answer this.
Because I probably can jump in on this. See, I'm in a slightly different situation. So mine's not university centred, mine's school based. So I applied to the school for my teacher training. So I've been with them since September and I will be with them till the end of my PGCE. However, this is going to sound like self-promotion. It's not, I promise. I do a podcast about my PGCE and I've been speaking to a lot of other trainees for this, and some of them don't have placements and some of them are really struggling to find one because a lot of schools don't want trainees in right now, which is completely understandable because they're trying to minimise the amount of people that are in the building. In terms of meeting the teaching standards, there are ways you can absolutely meet the teaching standards not on placement. It is absolutely trickier, it is, but your university and your awarding body they do know this and they wouldn't put you at a detriment in terms of that. So you should still be able to meet the teaching standards, even not on placement. But I don't know if, I mean, Robin, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I think Hattie, Larissa, this is a great opportunity to bring Kevin into the conversation, if I may. Kevin, if you're there. Didn't know we were about to do that, did you, Kevin? So very warm welcome to you, Kevin. Always good to see you. And that you will have been listening into the questions that were just coming through. And we know that we're getting quite a few of them placed in the Q&A, which is around the necessary requirements for those who are currently training in order to get their QTS, what's changed, what hasn't changed, and also that we're getting questions that are around what students should do if they're finding themselves in a position where they either don't know about their circumstance or they feel that their training provider is unresponsive. So I'm drawing several questions together. And Kevin, if you could respond on that, and then we'll move into the second part, which was you and Larissa in conversation, which I think can pick up many of these themes for a moment or two. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Robin, and hi everybody on the call, and thanks to Larissa and Hattie and Naz for the input that you've given so far. And these questions are really heartbreaking in the chat. Let me start by saying, I think it's really important that the National Education Union and the National Union of Students work together. We've worked together on all sorts of things, climate change in the past, but you know, people who become students are recently being taught by teachers in the National Education Union, and then they become teachers. And we're really a holistic system. And what has happened to you training to be teachers this year is beyond the experience of anybody else, you know, going through the pandemic and you being in that position. And we do know that placements really matter in your development as a teacher. And so if you've missed out, we think you shouldn't lose out, but we have to look at that issue carefully. Now, the government, the DfE, has made some recognition formally at a high level. So normally you have to have experience in 2 schools. They've dropped that. Normally you have to have experience over the full age and ability range of the children that you would normally teach. And they've dropped that as a requirement to show skills in that across that whole thing. The 4-year groups, you normally have to do that. They've dropped that. 120 days experience in a school, they have dropped that as a requirement. So it is possible to get through the PGCE without having that 120 days, without having the 2 schools. So it's possible. It'll happen. We can't afford to lose this huge cohort of teachers. We really need you in our schools. So if you aren't getting responses when you are asking questions about that at university, then you should refer to the NUS, and that we will talk with the NUS and we'll take it up with the DfE if universities aren't responding when students are asking questions, because we really need you to come through as teachers in this situation. We've got our own advice line in the NEU, but that's more for workplace related issues. So if you've got an issue from during your workplace, that's a workplace related issue, you can go to our advice line. But on the courses, NUS is the first point of contact. But I just want to say again, we need you. The DfE knows that we need you. And so that means there is some leverage in this situation for us to exert in your favour. Now, it may be coming off this call because, frankly, maybe this shows my lack of knowledge. I hadn't picked up that there were so many people who were getting no placements. I thought the situation was more like that Hattie had described, of getting a placement and it being very disrupted. So if there are a significant number of people who've had no placements, then I think that's something specific for us to take up with the DFE, raising those questions on your behalf.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And we know that many students have had this experience of frustration, experience of disruption. But we also know that both the NUS and the NEU have very positive visions around what the experience should be like for trainees, but also what the experience should be like for those who qualify and enter the profession as new trainees, newly qualified teachers. And we know that the requirements and expectations around the early career framework are something that should be a source of real strength and support to those who are on the call tonight who will be taking up jobs in the coming years. So I'm going to go to Larissa first, if I may, and then come back to you, Kevin. And this is really talking a bit more about the positive vision around student training and about early placements, and recognizing all the frustrations and challenges of this year, kind of lifting our heads a little bit and saying, well, what lies beyond that? What can we do collectively to create the best environments for training and for early career teachers? Larissa first, then Kevin. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robin, for the question. I mean, I think what we're often seeing is students thrown into situations which have been very difficult for anyone this year, and often not a recognition that they're still students and still trainees and still need the support, the guidance, the systemic infrastructure that enables students to really thrive, and gives that confidence and gives the boost that people often need to navigate through those sticky situations which you'd get in any year, but of course have been multiplied and exacerbated in this, which has been a year like no other. So I think if we're zooming out a little bit, it's about, for us, a broader sense of what does accessible education look like, and not just kind of in university in a traditional sense, but all the way through to placements and other ways through which students get the kind of hands-on experience that enables them to be the best teachers they can be, as they hopefully go off to become NEU members. And so I think what we are trying to have kind of fruitful conversations with government about, but also more so empowering students to demand, is that we need the resourcing necessary to make those placements accessible. We need the resourcing necessary to make sure that the mental health provision is in place for those students. We need the resourcing necessary to make sure that everyone is able to access all of the different things that make up those different elements of the experience, as students kind of teeter between studentship and then taking up their space as part of workers' unions. So I think for us, it's really about accessible education in the round, thinking about assistive technologies for disabled students, thinking about what it means to really also deconstruct the experience, which is often very much about you know, the lack of resourcing and how that squeezes the experience for students, for trainee students, for those on placement and so on. So at the end of the day, it really does come down to, what does fully funded education mean? It means truly accessible education, and that extends to placements.
Thank you very much. And in doing so, overcoming so many of the barriers that can exist to otherwise really high quality teachers not finding their way through into the profession. Kevin, same question to you. You heard it earlier. This is about the NEU's view, particularly for early career professionals. If you would, Kevin.
I will try and talk about early career professionals, Robin. I just want to say that if I stray into saying some things which sound like the job at the moment, has some difficulties to it. I just want to also say before, teaching is the best job in the world. And we intend to make it the best job in the world, specifically in this country, because there are some things going wrong in it in this country, but it is the best job in the world. So, you know, I'm really glad you're training to be a teacher. I want to say that we have seen things through the pandemic that are not new, but they've had fresh light cast upon them, and they will make it a bit easier for us to press for change. So on the one thing that's away from teachers, but is really vital to all of our view of education, is the role of poverty and inequality in the experience that children have going through the education system. And during this isn't new, COVID didn't create it. Child poverty has been increasing in this country dramatically since 2010 with the austerity programs. It wasn't that it didn't exist before that, but there was some bearing down on it. So COVID hasn't created it, although it's made it worse. But during the course of this year, teachers have been in the experience where they've looked into children's homes. I mean, literally through the Zoom or the Teams lesson. And what we've seen, what our members have seen through that is, at the beginning, how many children didn't have a laptop. We knew that, but we knew how many didn't have a laptop. Then we found out how many had no broadband connection, their only connection through a mobile phone contract. Then we found out, even after we pressed the government and very slowly they managed to roll some of that out, then children whose parents couldn't afford to keep the electricity on, so that they were out of lessons and then seeing through the Zoom lens, the fact that children were sharing a bedroom with 3 or 4 other siblings in a way that somebody else mentioned earlier. And so we have seen, and there are really profound effects. And we really, for the best education for all children, we need a government that is actually going to try and do something about poverty and inequality in our society. But then we've also seen during this pandemic things that we can help. Hattie mentioned, or was it Naz said, get rid of exams. So we need to assess children, obviously. You know, teachers assess children all the time to help their learning. But sometimes exams are there are far too many exams in our country compared with other countries. And what we saw in the mess up last year with GCSE grades, the fact that there was no teacher assessment because Michael Gove had moved away from teacher assessment in 2014 made the system really brittle. And I think we can see that we need teacher assessment much more in our system, and we need to train on, we need to have professional development on that, because it's a skill that teachers have, but it also needs to be inculcated, you know, and encouraged. But it also raises the question of why we have exams at 16. What is the purpose of GCSE exams at 16? And I think most of us, reflecting back on it, can't actually see a significant purpose. There is something to do with guiding students about which A levels would be best, but we could have a more expansive curriculum than the A levels that we've got. These are big changes, but we think that a move away from exams at 16, and actually we're finding now that there are many voices beyond us that are starting to say that. Even people in the Conservative Party and in the Confederation of British Industry are starting on some level to speak the same truth as us on these questions. So that really matters, I think. And we've got a vision of education there, a vision of relevance to the children who are in our schools. So we label this in all sorts of different ways. The NEU's been doing some work, NEU members have been doing work on decolonizing the curriculum. And that's, you know, it's a label, but it's about making a curriculum that's relevant instead of Michael Gove's EBAC, which is only there to create a league table for schools and which isn't about equipping children for the world beyond school. There is stuff to do on that. And we really want to build. You're on this call, you've got degrees. You are now engaged in a postgraduate qualification, the vast majority of you. You deserve respect as professionals who are committed to the job that you're doing. And we see some of that in other countries, and we want to get a lot more of that in our country. You will know, you won't have gone into this job with eyes closed. You know that there's a problem of workload in our schools. And what we see from the National Education Union is that the problem of workload is it's not entirely the amount of work. There's something more to it. Teaching's always been a long hours job, but long hours preparing exciting lessons for your children is quite different to long hours preparing evidence for a bureaucrat who doesn't trust you. And if you compare the working hours in England with the working hours in other European countries, you find we have about the same amount of time in class with the children, but teachers in England are doing twice as much as teachers outside England in the other European countries in terms of work they do outside the class. And that's about us not being trusted in this country by all the systems of league tables and Ofsted, and which have some reflections then in internal schools. So we want to work for a system where there is some proper teacher professionalism, some teacher autonomy, some respect for you as a professional who's got a degree, who's done a postgraduate qualification, who's really committed to the children that you're teaching. And we really want to work on that. There is a small gain in our view. It is very small, but this is relevant specifically to you. We have welcomed the early career framework. Now, so the early career framework, we think this is a tiny step in the direction we want to go. So you could think of this two ways. It means the induction takes 2 years. Is that more of a pain? We think it's more support. And we think that especially this year, when you may have missed out on those placements, then getting that support, getting extra non-contact time. So it's 10% extra non-contact time in the first year, and then 5% extra non-contact time in the second year of that induction. And there is some sense, we hope it's going to work, of trying to professionalize the mentoring, the support that you get during that early career framework. We do think that's a small step in the right direction. And we want to go as the National Education Union, as you leave NUS and become, we want to work with you through that process of that early career framework and getting through that two-year induction. You can change school during that time. There are ways of extending it if you need to, but that 2-year induction we think is a good system because it builds in some extra support for extra professional development. So we hope, fingers crossed, that that's going to turn out to be a good thing.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. And for me as a head teacher, the idea that I'm able to provide mentoring, not just in that first year, but in a phased way into the second year as well, is clearly a really welcome thing. Now, Larissa, I could see that you wanted to come in at that point. I'm just going to throw out another question. It's a question around well-being. It's a question around managing time and pressures. And we've had that question posed in a number of different ways, but Keris posted it with the following words. She said, what advice do you have for student teachers to help manage their time, pressures of marking, completing their own coursework, having good mental health, and supporting the students that they're caring for? So Larissa, if you could pick up on that. And I'm wondering if Nazifa and Hattie want to come back in to respond with perhaps some very practical experiences from their own stories. I'll step back over to you, Larissa.
Thank you so much, Robin. Yeah, I was ready to jump back in because so much of what Kevin was saying was really resonating with me. I think that the question of well-being is a really pertinent one, and I know that my mum's on the call and she's an NEU member and has been for a number of years, and I've seen her navigating what is a kind of relentless workload that teachers experience. And so I just want to first of all say a massive solidarity to all you folks for all of that and all of that work that goes into forming the next generation of our members, but also of our literal country. And I think so much of the question of well-being, of welfare, of mental health is so inherently interrelated to those barriers that Hattie was speaking to before about the financial barriers, because of course there is a huge level of anxiety, of difficulty that comes alongside having to work alongside study, having to work alongside placement, having to find ways to fill the gap left by the government when people are not able to make ends meet through studying and through placements. And so I think so often there's this personal onus to figure out a way to match all these pieces of a puzzle together, when actually what needs to happen is the government needs to step up and recognise that this is a completely unsustainable expectation put upon trainee teachers and student teachers to do it all, and to then also have time to nurture themselves. That is just unsustainable, and it's almost, you know, trainee teachers and student teachers being set up to fail in being told if you're from a working class community, of course, Black and brown students are also disproportionately working class, and all folks at the margins being told, yes, you have to put in all of these hours to complete this course. Yes, you're needed to do all of this, but at the same time, that's not enough to live on. And so, of course, there's an inherent expectation there that you're taking on additional work, that you're taking on additional hours, that you're making up that structural gap there. And I just don't think it's good enough that it's constantly positioned as an individual issue, that you must figure out a way to manage your time better, that you must figure out a way to work faster. When actually that's just not good enough. And so I think what we need to be doing is putting more pressure on this government to step up and recognise how difficult it's been, not only this year, but every year, for trainee teachers who haven't had sufficient maintenance support and sufficient redress for the work that they do, and their living costs, and everything that they need just to survive. And you know, lots of students have struggled to make ends meet this year. We know that around 9% of students have had to access food banks, and of course the numbers of students suffering is particularly acute for those from liberation backgrounds, from marginalised communities. And if we're continuing on with this very individualised approach to mental health, to well-being, it just continues to feed onto what is a cycle of inaccessible education from cradle to grave, because it speaks to who is able to even do these degrees and even become trainee teachers and then go out into do that work. Because if it's this inaccessible for the folks who are within the system, of course there are people who find themselves even unable to take on these degrees and this work because of that kind of gap and that barrier. So I think we need to see this as education across the piece. Of course, in this space, talking about you folks as teachers, for those younger than yourselves, but you as students, and thinking about who can go on to become students, who is falling between the gaps because of a disableist approach to the financial barriers to doing this form of education. And really redressing those fundamental flaws, which are just being exposed and exacerbated by the crisis that we find ourselves within, and using this as impetus to demand a free, accessible and lifelong education system that actually belongs to the students, staff and communities that exist to serve. And so I think when it comes to higher education, this is about really redressing marketization and how it produces an inaccessible system that is compounding the student mental health crisis every single year. And just to know that you are not alone in that crisis at all. There are so many students who are struggling with the inaccessibility of this system. But also seeing this as part of the work that you folks are doing to create positive well-being and positive environments for the well-being of the students that you're interacting with every day. So yeah, I think I'm really glad that we're able to have the conversation, but don't feel as though the onus is on you as an individual to fix a system that is broken.
Larissa, that's visionary and really encouraging as well to hear, an understanding that firstly, people aren't on their own in these circumstances, but also an understanding that actually there are things that can be done need to be done, should be done, and should be done structurally to address these issues. I'm going to pass over to Kevin, and then hopefully we can bring Nazifa and Hattie back in. At the moment, I haven't got them live on my screens. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and thanks, Larissa. Fantastic things that you said there. I should have said at the beginning that I'm Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, and you'll know, hopefully, that my co-Joint General Secretary is Mary Bousted, and she wanted me specifically to say hello to you tonight. There's two of us, so we don't all do everything together, but Mary really wanted to say hello. And in terms of these questions of workload, I really want to agree with Larissa. There are things that we need to address to government. It's different in our country to other countries, and that speaks to government having a responsibility. But we also, Mary and I both think that the NEU, the National Education Union, has grown a lot stronger during the pandemic. We wouldn't wish this pandemic on anyone. It's been terrible for our country. So many people have died, but we have grown stronger through it. We're 35,000 more members. We have thousands more reps than we had going into it. And we want to use that increased strength to try and make it better in schools as well, because alongside the more members and the more reps, we've been doing things like issuing checklists about safety and union policies, and we find that members are much more looking at asking, what does the union say about this? And head teachers saying, well, what's the union's position on this? And so there is much more chance of us being able to get a good opinion into place. And we do know that in a school where the union is better organized, generally workload is quite a lot less than a school where the union is poorly organized. So there is a collective solution in there. During the summer term, you may not know anything about this, but there is a thing in teacher conditions called directed time. The head teacher is not permitted under law to direct your hours for more than 1,265 days, hours in a year, and over more than 195 days. Many head teachers, like Robin, they will do a directed time calendar every year which sticks to that or is within that. In some schools, we don't have those. So we're going to do a little bit of a push to say, no, every school has to have that, so that you know when the parents' evening is in advance, so that in that week there isn't also a staff meeting, those sorts of things, and just a bit of control on hours. It doesn't solve the problem whole scale by any means, but we want to use the union's new, better collective strength to do that. There are also specific things about newly qualified teachers. Most schools, you will get a mentor who will talk with you and will look after you and will ensure that you get that extra 10% PPA time. In some schools, it needs a bit of a kick just to make sure that that happens. So talk to your local NEU rep in your school to make sure that those things are in place for you. And God, I also want to say what Larissa said, don't take it on board. It'll be a hard year. Your first year of anything new is going to be difficult, but you aren't failing if it's difficult. Talk to your mates, talk to the rep in school, talk about the experience, talk about how hard it is. It gets easier. We want to make it a lot easier because teachers are doing far too many hours, but the first year is not an easy year. I can see Hattie nodding that the student year isn't an easy year, and I'm sure Naz will agree with me that the first year of teaching there's a lot of workload, getting your head around everything, but don't feel a failure if you think you're not coping with those hours. It's just that there's too many of them, and it's there's a collective solution in there. Talk to your mates, talk to them about how they're going.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I'm going to come to Hattie and to Nazifa, and I'm going to be asking you just to give any advice or guidance to people on the call around strategies that you may have adopted to manage the challenges of the working environment you're in. And I'm going to throw another question in there for you as well, which I think is always really good to hear from young people in the education profession, working in schools, training to work in schools, to hear about what's motivated them, why did they choose to do this? Because we know it's hard work. And hearing a little bit about that motivation, I think will probably resonate with many people on the call. We're then going to move into the last section, because we're almost into the last 5 minutes. I'm going to come back to Larissa and Kevin and talk to the two of you, please, if I may, about the role of the NUS in supporting students through their teacher training, and the role of the NEU in building and strengthening professionalism in the classroom and beyond the classroom. So Hattie, Nazifa, deliberately giving you a little bit of thinking time there. So really, Hattie, let's go first. Any handy hints, advice, guidance, things that you have found helped you manage the challenges, and also just something maybe about what's motivated you to keep you going through what's been a challenging time? Hattie.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Larissa said really did resonate with me. It is just remembering here that this is not your well-being in a system like this should not fall onto you solely at all. So when you've got people saying you need better time management, you should have done this earlier, you need to quit your job, you know, teaching is your life and that's all you can ever do, teaching is now your hobby, your job, everything. No, that's not the case at all. You do need to remember to keep that life. You know, you were you before you were a trainee teacher, and becoming a trainee teacher does not stop you being you. But the biggest thing I've found is, and I'm still struggling with this, but learning to say no. Not particularly in my school, but in a lot of stories that I've heard here, is that trainees are often given classes which people don't want. I've heard stories of trainee teachers acting as cover supervisors for staff that are shielding, and basically just becoming a volunteer. You know, this is your degree, without trying to sound like I'm justifying a consumerist education system. I'm not, because education needs to be free and it needs to be democratized. But you are paying for this degree, you are paying for this experience, you do need the support, and you're not paying to become a volunteer in a school. So if you are doing too many classes, if you are working more than what a qualified teacher should be working, you are entitled to say no, you are entitled to cut back those hours. And I found that talking to my personal tutor at the university does help with that. And they can step, that's not your responsibility, because I understand that you do want to seem professional and you do want to look like you can say yes to everything, but the university should then be stepping in and helping you with that. And just very quickly, because I know we want to go on to Naz as well. I know a lot of trainee teachers are kind of afraid to say, Joe, I am feeling anxious, I am feeling nervous, because there is a whole stigma around mental health, which there absolutely shouldn't be, particularly in teachers, because there's this whole narrative of you must be really mentally healthy to teach and to do all this. You are human, remember that. And there is absolutely ways that you can help with that. I know the NEU are particularly great with this, and find out who your NEU rep is in your placement school and do chat to them. But in terms of motivation, I'm going to say this flat out. I hated school, hated it. But I had some incredible teachers that got me through it. And that is the reason I wanted to be a teacher, because I want to be the teacher that I needed when I was a student, and that I did have in about 4 of my teachers at school. It wasn't until I got to college that I actually enjoyed education, and I never want a student to experience the kind of things I did. So that's what keeps me motivated.
Hattie, those superb answers. I hope everybody on the call has just taken your advice and also just listened to that energy and commitment to be that best teacher for other people. Fantastic. Naz, if you would, please.
Yeah, no, just to echo what Larissa said earlier, you know, a lot of these problems are structural, and it will take a lot of fighting and being vocal about what we're being exploited to do to actually achieve change. But in terms of practical tips, you know, sometimes my school in particular can be quite bad when it comes to listening to the union. So, you know, if you haven't got a union rep, have those conversations with your colleagues. I found it so useful, especially after the action that the NEU took in January, to just have conversations with people to make sure they're in the union, and, you know, be honest and open, and there's nothing, and to realize that there is actually nothing wrong when it comes to discussing your mental health. Like Hattie said, we are human. Just because we are school staff members doesn't mean that we can't also have mentally ill health. And it's okay to be frank and honest about this. You know, if you don't have a union rep, make sure people are A, members in the first place, B, ask your district secretary to set up a members meeting so that you can elect a rep. You know, it was quite difficult for me at the beginning because my probationary period was 6 months out of a 1-year term, but having those conversations has really helped, and we are moving towards getting an all members meeting soon to finally hopefully elect a rep before I leave. In terms of struggling to cope, like Hattie said, say no. If you feel like you can, if you need support, speak to your mentor, speak to the rep if you have one, and say no, because you do, in order for us to create the best environment we can for our students, we need to make sure that we are looking after ourselves as well. You know, their learning conditions are our teaching and working conditions, and so we can't compromise on that at all. When it came to my motivations for working in education, my story is fairly different to Hattie's. I loved school. My sixth form experience, however, was very different. I grew up in Tottenham in London, which is obviously a very, very diverse area. And I went to sixth form in an area that was completely different. And I saw the racism and the gendered sort of Islamophobia that can exist within our education system, that is structural to it, which I perhaps didn't notice as much as I did when I was at my school in Tottenham. And I thought, and the school I work at now the student body is mostly Muslim, and they're mostly Black and brown students. And I thought, if I can go into a school where I look like some of these students and I sound like some of these students, and these students can relate to me, then I was hoping to make a difference. And especially when it came to pastoral care in the middle of this whatever we're in, and when students, especially from Black and brown communities, are suffering from bereavement left, right and centre, I thought if they had someone they could relate to, then hopefully I could actually leave a lasting impact on, even if it was just one student. And it has, and you know what, it is really rewarding. It's hugely rewarding to be working with students, and I can only speak for this year, but especially this year. But that doesn't mean, again, that you can't say no to when you're being overworked. So please make sure you do.
Thank you very much, Naz. And I can say with absolute confidence in hearing those two stories that both of you will already have had an impact on young lives. And it grows, and there's more to come. And we've got on the call today several hundred trainee teachers. So thank you to everybody who's joined us. I am going to call on Larissa and Kevin for some final words in just a moment. But a simple reminder to everybody on the call that if you are a trainee teacher, or if you are just started in a school on a training program or just an NQT, do as you've heard. Make sure you're a member of the NEU. Make sure you know who your rep is. Make sure you come together to talk about the issues and challenges that you're facing. We've had just over 40 questions posted in the Q&A function. We haven't been able to answer all of them, but one of the great things about these Zoom calls is we take those questions, we use them to shape the advice that we then publish, we put it on our website. You can download the NEU app and you can access the advice and guidance there. And we've also got a really helpful publication. I'm just going to make sure I get the title right. Finding Your First Job. I'm sure that right at the moment that will be an issue for many of you thinking about it. And we know that even that process is challenging at the moment. But please take a look on the website to find that. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go to Kevin first, then to Larissa, just asking you to give just a few final words of advice and support coming from the NEU and then from the NUS to the fabulous trainee and student teachers on the call tonight. Kevin.
Thank you very much, Robin. I want to say again, it's the best job in the world, and we've got to work to make sure that that's really obvious in our country, England and in Wales. There is, look for the union's website. You will find loads of good advice on there. For example, we are running a free series of Cpd courses for Nqts and students from April the 26th to the 30th. And that's going to look at, we're going to have experts talking about how to manage low-level disruption in your classroom, a feature of some classrooms some of the time, build an effective classroom team, look after your voice, make an impression on your first day in work. So that's CPD that's free. But there are lots of other ways of getting involved in our union. You don't have to be part of any of these, but we have a Black Educators Network, that covers Black and brown people in our union. That is a fantastic, really vibrant network that we have. An LGBT Educators Network, Disabled Educators Network, and we've got young and early career. So under 35 is young. Early career is if you're just starting as a teacher, no matter how old you are, we've got a network that you can be involved in. And those events are really uplifting if you want to be involved in those. So there's that CPD, there are those networks. Talk to the other members in your school, find out who the rep is, talk with them about what's happening to you, ask them to have discussions in the school union group about the things that matter in your school workplace. Thank you for being on the call, and good luck with what we do next year.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And final words with Larissa. Thank you so much, Larissa. It's been good to actually get a good Wi-Fi connection for the whole of the second part. Thank you.
It managed to survive. I hope I haven't just jinxed it. But yeah, really want to thank Hattie and Naz for those words, and really echo what Kevin said there about really reaching out to your local reps. So please do be in touch with your local students union and your local NEU reps, of course. I guess I want to close out for me by saying that we're in what campaign theorists refer to as the moment of the whirlwind, which is essentially a time of crisis that spawns the opportunity for mass social change. And I really do want everyone on this call, everyone watching, to see themselves as an agent of that change, and a space where we can build towards an education system that puts in place lots of the things that we've been talking about this evening: the financial support, the mental health provision, and all the other systemic things that we need to have an education system that is fully funded, that is lifelong, that is truly accessible, but also that's co-owned by students, staff and communities. And as Kevin was saying earlier, that's decolonized and liberated. I also want to in the spirit of being agents of change, invite you to come along to our rally next week at 6 p.m. rather, on the 7th of April. Next Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the fact that students deserve better than the way that they've been treated this year throughout the pandemic. And when we say that students deserve better, that includes student teachers, it includes all students on placement, of course. And I'll finish with this, I suppose. You likely became a student teacher or a trainee teacher because you believe in the transformative power of education, and I guess all I'm asking you to do is to believe that you deserve to experience that too. So whenever you're experiencing injustice, whenever you feel as though you're being let down, use that fire, use that frustration, use that anger, and turn it into action that through collectivism has the power to not only transform the education system but transform the world. Thank you so much for coming and for listening, and I'll hand back to Robin.
Thank you so much, Larissa, and thank you to everybody who has made this call possible. Thank you again to Sam Riddle and Nikki Evans for the signing through BSL interpretation, and thank you to the technical team behind the scenes. Just echoing Larissa's words, a transformed education system and a transformative education system where the workforce are agents of change and where we help and support young people to transform their lives. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we will be in contact, I'm sure, over the many months and years ahead. Thank you very much.